All right. Hello, everybody. We're going to give people a minute or two to come on in, and then we're going to jump in. Thank you for joining us today. All right. I see plenty of participants. Okay. So, hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about virtual production and in-camera VFX, and we're going to focus on the educational side of this. If you are a working professional or a student and you're interested in virtual production as a career, what is it that you need to know? What is the important things? What are the interesting things? What is going to help you get into a career in this new and exciting industry? So to kick this off, I want to give a big welcome to our panelists. First, we have Shanaz Batch, who is the Director of Screen Industry Training Hub, a Toronto-based company focusing on creative screen industry workforce development through innovative technologies, partnerships, and training solutions. Shanaz leads a skilled team with decades of experience to design and deliver training programs for the nonprofit community, unions, guilds, societies, companies, and educational institutions. She covers virtual production, VFX, film and TV, virtual reality, animation, and game design, and her work includes a special focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion, community development, and economic development in the entertainment sector. So welcome, Shanaz. Thank you for joining us. Then we have Tiago Correa Carneiro. Tiago is a virtual production specialist at Geographic and educator advisor at Epic Games. He has background as a lead Unreal Engine generalist at Pixelmondo Toronto, where he contributed to shows like The Boys, Halo, Star Trek, and Avatar Airbender, the Airbender. Tiago is active in the education community as well at a global level, cultivating relationships with institutions in Brazil, Portugal, and Canada, and is an instructor at multiple institutions here in Toronto, teaching gaming, animation, and VFX. Welcome, Tiago. Jim Godaldick. Jim is a virtual production visual effects supervisor and cinematographer who has worked across film, TV, broadcast, experiential music videos, and even action sports films, which I definitely need to check out. Watching Jim's videos on YouTube, and hearing him talk in other panels, you will see that Jim is really inspired by the power of emerging technologies for creatives and storytelling in general. He is an industry leader in virtual production, visual effects, volumetric capture, and real-time workflows, collaborating on award-winning projects for Disney, Amazon, Sony, Red Bull, Epic Games, and many others. Thank you for joining us, Jim. Mujia Liao. Mujia is head of the virtual art department and art director at Pixelmondo. Mujia has worked on many high-profile television series such as The Mandalorian, Westworld, Star Trek Discovery, as well as feature films like Wonder Woman and The Fast and the Furious. And in this role, she works closely with filmmakers and production designers as art director and focuses on structuring and building the virtual art department, or VAT, as we're going to talk about. She works on that team at Pixelmondo. She's also one of the core Pixo pioneers who helped the studio transition to virtual production on their LED volume stage. Welcome, Mujia. Ben Love. Ben is Lux Machina's head of engine operations. He combines extensive knowledge of Unreal and various DCCs with technical expertise in virtual production and VFX from a diverse career spanning roles at Autodesk, Technicolor, Giant Studios, and Lightstorm Entertainment. Ben recently completed virtual productions for a very cool project, the opening ceremony of the League of Legends World's Finals in Seoul, Korea, a huge project, and he was acting as lead of the engine team. So very cool. Welcome, Ben. Brian Poole. Brian is a technical program manager and pre-visualization supervisor with over 17 years of experience as a visual effects artist, a layout artist, and a previs supervisor. He is a veteran of George Lucas's previs team and Industrial Light and Magic's art department, with previous credits on over 27 feature films. Brian has also worked for 9 years in the software development industry, designing new tools, improving workflows for digital artists. He has also had a huge impact on education as a teacher, a subject matter expert, and recently having worked at Epic Games, constructing and managing a community education program known as the Unreal Fellowship. This program has impacted over 1,000 fellows, and in doing so has contributed to shaping the future of the virtual production industry by educating its members. Thank you for joining us, Brian. And last, but certainly not least, Marianne Talavera, who is the Associate Director for Recruitment in the Office of Special Programs at the New York University Tisch School of Arts. She's an award-winning creative technologist, filmmaker, and educator, teaching XR world building at the new school. Mary Ann is also the founder of Rolos Productions, co-founder of the Arixa Project, and a member of Onyx Studios. Her work focuses on projects that tackle social justice issues like race, gender, and climate change. And she has won a Heroes Award for a project called Root that highlighted issues of representation within 3D, specifically the lack of Afro-textured hair assets and Black character options. Thank you for joining us, Mary Ann. What an amazing panel we have. We're going to jump in just a second. I just want to shout out, the Q&A is open. If you have questions as we're going, we'll either try to answer them directly, or I will bring them to the group in the discussion. And please stick around until the end. We're going to highlight some useful resources for people, some special options that will be useful. My name is Laurence Cymet. I am a member of the board of managers in the VS Toronto chapter, and I'm also the head of technology at VFX Studio, a VFX studio in Toronto. Also with us, we have Roy C. Anthony, who was the other organizer of this event. So thank you, Roy, for helping to get this going. Okay, so when we talk about virtual production, this term has been around for decades now, I think. And we could be referring to a wide array of filmmaking that includes tools to capture performance for 3D on set, or help visualize and experience VFX live for the filmmakers on a film set. For this discussion, we'd like to focus on IC VFX, or in-camera VFX, where we see the use of an LED screen volume with projections on them and we've seen this in a couple of very popular shows like The Mandalorian, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, or movies like Thor, Love and Thunder. So I'd like to start this off to just kind of set our focus here with Brian. How does the industry distinguish in-camera VFX, or IC VFX, from the virtual production rainbow in general?
Well, the term virtual production, like you defined, it's kind of an umbrella term. So it usually encompasses several subcategories. And I would define those subcategories as like all forms of computer-generated visualization, like all the previs techs, TechViz, previs, postviz, etc. And then you have all the different capture technologies, whether you're doing motion capture, performance capture, facial capture, etc. Even animation, as keyframing is a form of capturing information. But then traditional VFX, very green screen centric technologies, traditional VFX as we have commonly known it, and then in-camera VFX, which includes, the LED wall. So it's the process of combining all of these different subcategories, which forms kind of an industry discipline for production. And that's what we refer to as virtual production. And ICVFX specifically identifies using an LED wall in that process.
Nice. And, with all of these things, I find there's often a lot of lingo involved. And so I'm curious, Brian, Jim, other people, Ben, are there some examples, a few examples of terms that you think we're going to use in this conversation that we should highlight? And I'll start with one. What is the volume? I always hear, okay, in the volume.
Sure. I'll take it and then I'll probably hand it over to Jim or something. But a volume is basically it's a 3D space in the real world that deploys things like camera and actor capture, performance capture technology, and it relays the position of those items, whether it's the camera or the actor, into a virtual space. So the LED volume is all of that kind of technology, but also includes an LED wall in the real world. So whatever is rendered in the virtual world or its environment is projected onto this LED wall, and then it's shot through camera as in-camera visual effects. So there isn't necessarily a need for a post-process or post-production process to get a visual effects shot, though you can, obviously, if you want. But that's kind of how I see it. Jim, what do you think?
I definitely agree with that. We've basically taken lots of LED panels and dropped them into a mocap stage, is probably the easy way to put it. Um, you know, the term volume obviously is coming from a tracked volume from ages of mocap, as a lot of you all know. Um, but yeah, Brian's point of a lot of these different technologies and approaches being used together under virtual production for in-camera visual effects is it, it it's a lot of terms that we're probably going to be talking about today, but specifically when we're talking about, volumes, I think Brian hit it pretty much on the head of talking about what encompasses that. And, when we're talking specifically about volumes, there is the LED wall side of it where we just have a flat back panel versus more of the shapes, different shapes that we've seen in terms of configurations, kind of like a horseshoe shape with and without a ceiling. And, the terms get thrown around a little bit, but from the actual specifications of the build, we're used to seeing either these flat walls, like we see for a lot of live visuals out there, but for ICVFX, we're more so talking about a back wall with a ceiling for a volume.
Cool. And I'm curious, like we've talked about this 3D world that gets projected into the volume and it extends the stage where the actors can be. But I've also seen sets where the walls are really acting as kind of like kind of like a rear projection background. Like it might be a panel that is the window outside of a car, for that matter. Is there a way we distinguish between those two scenarios, whether it's like live action footage that's going on the LED screen or a 3D world that is connected to the camera?
Obviously, you can do it in either configuration. You can, have the background linked to a live 3D image being generated from Unreal. So, as you move the camera, the background moves, or you can have a plate of video that is, potentially put into the background, like you said, in a window, which works great.
So, and that's all just in-camera VFX. We don't really distinguish between it.
As long as you're shooting through, the camera to compose a foreground image and a background image, and you're shooting through, you can refer to it as in-camera visual effects.
Okay, cool. And I'm looking at Jim's background, and it looks very cool, but it also looks very expensive. We've seen all this technology, the LED walls, the 3D camera tracking, Genlock. There's a lot of technology that goes into these stages. Does this technology scale? And I'm curious, starting with Ben, what is the barrier for entry for getting into this? Can it be done in a more accessible way, or do you need a really big budget?
I think the thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you're working by CDFX, it's best to work with needs when you're serving a need rather than being thought of as a giant sandbox. There are always going to be technical requirements, but how much technology you need is definitely scalable. Whether you need 3D or 2D is a scale to be considered. So the better or whether or not you want to go back to green screen, it's all about the shot you want to get and what you need for that shot. So in some cases, a car process might just be some panels for that shot that are outside the window or for outside of an airplane window. Or you might need a wall, a smaller wall to show off a city in the background, but that doesn't necessarily need to be 3D as either. So you can go down to as small as, you know, a window outside of a house all the way up to the volume that Jim's sitting in front of. But it depends on what your needs are, right? If you need to have your actors walking around and the environment to wrap around them, you need a wall on the scale that background there. But if you just need them to be lit to get your reflections on a reflective surface and for it to feel like they're there, you can scale down.
Cool. Jim?
Yeah, just to iterate on top of that, obviously the LED volume in my background is going to be something that's a little bit more of a cost budgetary wise. But that's not to be forgotten upon, you know, from the indie level or even the lone artist. I think there's a lot of examples out there you can search at at nauseum on YouTube and Google of people that are doing aspects of virtual production in, you know, in their home office, in their garage as YouTubers, VTubers, Twitch streamers. Just because it is used on The Mandalorian and a lot of projects we all work on, there are definitely aspects that you can take out as a student, as an individual, in develop, you know, in developer, filmmaker, whatever it is, and you know, as Ben picked out, like what is the shot that you're trying to accomplish, and then you can look at what the creative and technical approach is to that, of like, how can I get it done in my garage versus do I have or can I search out the budget to do it on a much larger scale.
And to add on to exactly that, it's a lot easier to scale up than it is to scale down. So the more nimble you can be to begin with, the easier your budget and easier time you're going to have going forward. So, you know, it is all about trying to keep your costs and your technology requirements low until you need to go high.
Right on. So this is really more about like, you know, when is it applicable? We shouldn't be scared by this technology. That's great. So, and I want to dig into the impact of this. Like, you know, this is ultimately a new technology, but it's being embraced. There's stages popping up all over the world. Obviously, this is a big thing. I'm curious, starting with Jim and Ben and Brian, have you seen examples where in-camera VFX has had a huge impact on a production? It allowed filmmakers to do something they could never do before, tell their story that they couldn't, you know, possibly do before.
Sure, I can jump in with a couple examples. Um, a lot of projects that I've worked on in the past year alone, we had certain restrictions with talent and weather. So, you know, we were doing a shoot out east and it was kind of a hot, muggy, you know, summer, typical of that kind of East Coast, you know, from New England down to Florida, shooting multiple locations. Normally, to have to go out to the multiple locations, look at the weather constantly, strike teams, you know, when the weather rolls in and have to worry about those windows, being able to shoot on an LED volume, you can plan more accordingly. You can budget accordingly. You can shoot around schedules. And you know, if you have certain restrictions of time of day and weather situations, you can, you know, that's one of the best benefits I think of, you know, for shooting on an LED volume is if you need to have, you know, 3:20 p.m. in a New York City skyline and an exact type of weather pattern, lighting scenario that the DP, the gaffer, the director, production designer all want to hit, you could shoot 5 days in a row or 2 weeks in a row on an LED volume versus having to play a little bit of Russian roulette with the, you know, the weather or being at the, you know, the behest of Mother Nature at times.
Nice. So you have infinite time in a way. Ben.
I was going to, in a similar way, highlight a show I was on where we were working with a very young child as principal. And in that case, working on the LED volume helped us in a number of ways. We were able to keep the child engaged, which is really, really hard to do with a green screen. And it also takes a lot of takes when you're working with kids. So being able to have that, like you were saying, Jim, that static environment that stays how you need it as long as you need it was really, really useful in that case. But one of the best things about shooting on the volume was that in engaging her, we were we needed her eye line, right, to look at a certain location. And we had the volume so we could direct her where to look and she knew what she was looking towards. But I was also during the shots triggering an in-screen the effect across the volume that showed up in the reflection of her eyes. So without the technology, that all would have had to be done in post. Her experience and her reactions would have been different. Like you got her sense of reacting to it happening in front of her in shot. So it was one of those things that you couldn't have done any other way. So there are some real practicalities here that just don't exist without it.
Muja.
I just wanted to add one where it could be a popular location. You just can't actually shut down the Times Square or anywhere in the world. So on a project that we are working on right now, it's one of those type of situations where it's easier to just shoot it on the volume. You replicate the location in the future using, technologies like Gaussian splattering and capturing like large sets. You can do that a lot easier and you don't have to worry about tourists and actually closing it down and however much the cost that actually is going to land on your budget. So yeah, a good use for VP.
Also, I wanted to add, talk about this film a little bit later, but the short film Fathead by C. Craig Patterson, it was set in a junkyard, and the actors were mainly child actors. Having a bunch of kids running around an actual junkyard could be super dangerous. So I thought that was a great use case.
Just to add on to that, having been on set for that, they had a lot of fun.
So ultimately, it sounds like this is a kind of filmmaking freedom when you're faced with a location that brings challenges. And I know we looked at a project that needed golden hour infinitely. The whole show was golden hour, which we know is like, you have maybe 45 minutes in a day if you're lucky enough for the sun to come out. So it's definitely a huge advantage. Okay, those are great stories. Thank you. I'm curious if we look out a few years, just to kind of get a sense of, like in the past few years, there's a huge increase in the use and growth of the technology. Ben, where do we see this going? Like if we look out 3 years from now, what does the world of virtual production and in-camera VFX look like?
I think you're going to see the markerless capture technology that's already there hit the fidelity point where you don't need suits, which means you're going to start having people doing capture in an LED volume. I think with AI and the way it's going, we're going to start going towards in-camera compositing being something that we can actually look at with particles and potentially even eventually some sorts of creature effects showing up in camera as we shoot. Not soon, but it's definitely out there. So I think that fusion is coming between all these different technologies, and I think the critical thing is going to be there's a fear around this AI coming in and changing things, but I think the thing is that becomes really important to understand is that it's a calculator. It has no motivation. So the important thing is going to be with these technologies using knowing your composition, knowing your design, and your color theory, and knowing how to direct that into this fusion of all these different things happening live, happening in front of you. So it's going to be really neat because we're not going to be waiting in 5-10 years from now for it to all happen and then show up in post. We're going to have to all get together and work on it, make it happen live. I think that's going to be a lot of fun, but it's also going to be very scary.
Indeed. Muja.
Also just adding, like we are seeing a lot of filmmakers asking for animation and interactivity. So being able to actually do something on the stage, maybe through the actors, and actually manipulating what's happening in the background in the stage, and having that sort of experience becoming more interactive, and you're controlling and you're doing all this, like moving the ships around and whatnot. I think that's going to be a thing, and everyone's looking forward to turning it into like a more engaging and direct experience with the volume, and not just like a backdrop anymore. So I think that's going to happen too.
That's very cool. I've seen demos where, they have a tracker in a lantern, and so they have a
Yeah,
little light, and that just is mind blowing.
that's right. We could have a tracker, and then we can have a spaceship in the volume, for example, and then you can actually manipulate it so that you're controlling where it's actually going. So it's like a live game, essentially. So very fun.
Very cool. Brian.
I would also point out that you'll probably see improvements in frame rate, from the camera and the display technology on the LED walls, so that you can shoot multiple plates simultaneously, in the sense that you can have a beauty pass and then a matte pass, and all of this would be captured simultaneously on a camera shooting at 240 frames per second or something like that. And then you'll have an instant extraction of a matte from your green screen. You'll have, the ability to slow down your shots, because slow-mo right now on an LED wall is not too pretty. And, that will be probably some big advancements in the next couple of years.
Nice. Jim.
Just like Brian, I'm hopeful in that we're going to move to a lot of capture devices using PTP, or precision time protocol, to make sure that not only are we capturing all of the lighting data, but the depth data, pretty much metadata as a whole being captured per frame for any of the devices that we're working on. So I think somebody mentioned in the questions too, of like where some of the issues are with that, and if we can capture all of this data, when we're shooting on a volume, if we do have to do fixes, that it goes down to traditional comp pipeline, it's going to be much easier for everybody from layout to comp to be able to then take that into a traditional post-production and visual effects workflow.
Nice. And a question from the Q&A. Can you define PTP?
Precision time protocol. Basically, it's a newer method of synchronization that a lot of manufacturers, especially in the capture, being our digital cinema cameras, are looking at implementing. So it's something to that if anybody is a SMPTE member, or looking at the advancements of SMPTE 2110 and other synchronization and updated protocols, it's part of this newer ecosystem that we're trying to move away from some older forms of Genlock and timecode.
Nice. And as someone who has jumped into this technology and struggled with timecode and Genlock, that is very positive. Now, before we move on, I just want to kind of level set a bit and look at the challenges. So this all sounds really exciting and cool, and like, why wouldn't we be using this every day? What are some of the real challenges that people face on a virtual production set that you might not face on a traditional film set? And I think we'll start with Ben with this, but please jump in, everybody.
I think the biggest challenge is the expectation that virtual production is a silver bullet for making anything you want on the fly, and having to re-educate everyone. We have not moved to the fix it button. This still requires you to know your shot, to build out virtual sets. Like, the expanse of what you can build is bigger. You can defy the laws of gravity. You can build whatever you want, but you still have to know what you want to build. You have to think that through and have it work for your shots. And I think education right now is one of the biggest challenges that we face, and we are constantly working on that with everyone we work with.
Nice. Muja.
Yeah, attaching onto the education part, we find that a lot of times we need to really talk about the idea of optimization and performance, that you may not get everything that you want. If you want to have like more dynamic lighting, you might have to give up some of the other aspects. So we have to kind of constantly play this game of balance, right? So that it's actually functional and we can have a successful shoot. And just the process of educating and explaining what you can and cannot do and being there to help guide them. I think that's usually the challenge we face. And filmmakers, for the first time engaging with the new technology, they wouldn't know what to expect. So onboarding and kicking off that with like a crash course for our clients, I think that would be useful. So everyone is coming in prepared.
Right on. Jim.
Yeah, I would just echo this is an integration into production, that is why it's called virtual production. Hands down, you're still working with all of the traditional teams. As a virtual production supervisor, I'm interfacing with all the other heads of departments from your traditional production. So your art team, your production designers, your gaffers, your grips, like it's still all those teams that are there, depending on if you're on large scale down to independent, you still have a lot of the same roles, just with the technology and the approach that virtual production introduces. Like Muja said, we're integrating another set of new technologies into something that is rooted in traditional production. So it is a lot of re-educating some ways that people have either thought virtual production happens. It's not, like you say, it's not a one trick, one ring to rule them all solution for every type of, project or shot. So it definitely takes the approach of having to discuss with all of the teams involved within any given production, whether it be broadcast, music video, or feature film, or live, live events, to discuss with all the teams like how this evolution is going to work with a shot advancing from previs to VAD to on stage to post.
Right on. And I'll call out VAD is probably another bit of lingo that we will hear, and it refers to the virtual art department, and we're going to jump on that in a second. But yeah, it sounds like diplomacy is a key skill on a virtual production stage. Tiago, you had your hand up. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the idea of education is not only on the parts of the professionals operating, but also on the expectations of the clients. I think that a lot of the problems that we see on sets is just someone saw the documentary on Disney about the Mandalorian. They have an idea where exactly they think it is the set experience, and they come with this expectation, oh, we're just going to move everything and change everything on the day, and they don't quite understand that some of those things, because we want that to be performant, it takes time to do some of those changes. Even though it's a real-time engine, even though it's a game engine, it's still not just like make a click and just there's a new mountain in the horizon. You can definitely do that if you plan to do that, but that's also the idea that we do need to educate the industry as a whole on what is feasible, what is not, and like any new technology, that's the challenge that we have right now.
That's it. Those real time gets air quotes from me all the time. Awesome. And it, Jim, you talked about the VAD virtual art department. I want to dig in there. Traditionally, the VFX process is, you have a green screen on set. There's a visual effects supervisor who's representing the visual effects studio, making sure the shots are all good. The actors never see what they're acting to. The shots are shot, the edit is done, the footage goes to the VFX studio. They do the work, and then the footage is handed back to the production. Obviously, this is a very different world, so I'm really interested in digging into, starting with Mujia. How does virtual production and the VAD or virtual art department change that dynamic?
So in virtual production, it kind of provides us this opportunity where all the key creatives get to sit in the same room, having a discussion throughout the whole process. Where in the past, like the production designer could come up with the idea of a beautiful set and then hands that off, but then realizing that's too expensive. So you build a portion of it, rest of it's green screen. He doesn't get to see it until way later and hoping VFX will do a good job to actually capture his vision. Or a lot of times for a DP, while the production designer is designing, he doesn't get to see it until his part is involved. So all the creatives are involved in the process in a kind of more linear process in the past, where they only see their portion, right? And now with VP and VAD, basically everyone gets to sit together and discuss it, so that while the production designer is coming up with this idea for the practical set, the virtual art department is in charge of handling the virtual extension or the background of it. So it's something that's happening in parallel, and we are actually helping each other out. And all these sessions that we would have would actually be played out in front of directors, writers, and DPs. So they all get a say in it, and they could actually look at it, and it sometimes inform how they actually write the story too. Often in times for like Strange New World shows where the director and EP Chris Fisher would encourage everybody in that room and say, do you have any idea about this? Can we actually do that? Is this feasible? And he would actually ask all of us to even pitch and give inputs. And that's kind of something that for me, I've never had before working in VFX, because everything is already carved out, it's already done. You just make it happen. Now you actually get to be involved since the beginning. And I think that's a true beauty, so that all the key creatives can collaborate, can work together, and actually build a cohesive environment.
That is I love that collaborative aspect, because
Yeah.
coming from traditional VFX, it's really kind of a black box kind of handoff there. Is there anybody else have any thoughts on, where the differences lie in between traditional VFX production? Tiago.
Yeah, I feel like one of the coolest things about working in the virtual art department is that, like we just said, that you can collaborate. It's just the idea that you can influence a little bit on how the final product is going to look like. That's something that usually when you work in a traditional VFX pipeline, when you work in a project and you might have an idea how stuff should go, you want to suggest how you would tackle a task or how you would do a specific environment. You can't really do that. This stuff is set in stone. Is working through the process is essentially a big pre-production meeting up almost up to the day that you're shooting. Like there is changes that happen the day before, so you can just really be involved in that. But with that also comes the challenge, because when do you pull the trigger and say, hey, we can't do it any more changes, right? So that's also like a practicing, get super involved in the process that you're just doing changes in the day, right? Both for the team that maybe we just want, oh, I just want to give just this pump in this detail here, but also to the directors, hey, I want to really change this thing in the last minute. I really saw this video yesterday or one of the sessions that you guys recorded, and I really like the sun in this completely different location. And then boom, it seems like a simple solution for a problem, but they breaks the lighting in the scene. So it is a engaging and most playful way to approach work, but it comes with the biggest challenges, which are self-control, right? What exactly we can do that will fit the molds there.
Jim.
I think one really good thing for virtual art department and all of the virtual production teams is to get a really good jump of setting expectations from the get-go.
Yeah.
I think that's one benefit we get to do, because virtual production is pushing decisions up more towards the front end than traditional post-production visual effects and post-viz is setting the right expectations to the other creatives, to all the other production departments that you're working with, because this is all basically choreography. It's a dance between all of us to get you know, to get a shot off, you know, and captured in cameras. So, you know, what Tiago and Muja said is really on point of, you know, really explaining to those other parties, be it, you know, the DP, production designers, you know, gaffer, everybody that sits in those pre-production meetings with the virtual art department to get a good idea of like what those shots are going to be on the day. We're basically
That's
live
true.
storyboarding through that as we're doing
Yeah.
DP light sessions. We're looking at where with TechViz, we're looking at where physical assets, both on the stage as props and in the virtual environment, are being placed, as well as, you know, cameras, lights, camera tracking, you know, motion control robots. Like it's a lot going into what a VAD session might be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tiago or Brian.
Well, I would simply say that, you know, obviously we're returning back to our roots of when film was shot on well, when things were shot basically on a stage, or it was all done on a stage. And to Jim's point, in-camera visual effects is essentially accomplishing what Previs was attempting to accomplish 15, 20 years ago when it first started off. It was like, all right, we're going to actually pre-visualize and think about what we do in pre-production before we actually go out and shoot it. The problem with Previs is it was simply still an exercise of story and of the mind and in CG. It didn't really get the other players involved as much as it should have, like the cinematographers, the people who are doing the lighting, cameramen. You know, it only got the director involved and the visual effects supervisor involved. But the rest of the production crew was kind of like, oh, okay, that's what we're going to do? Great. You know, now with virtual production and ICVFX, you have to get everybody involved because this dance is impossible to do just by telling somebody. You have to really take the time necessary to speak with all of these technicians and all of these artists to pull this off.
I'm really hearing the collaboration as a theme here. Shanaz.
I wanted to add as well that there's the beauty of photogrammetry now, where you can scan your real world locations, you can scan real assets and incorporate that into your virtual environment. So that's quite fun, and I see that as a very, very creative tool that can be used for directors to help them and the rest of the team collaborate and execute their vision.
Nice. And you know, relative to this, I want to answer a question that comes from the Q&A. Do you feel like the limitations that are run into when setting expectation on a volume set are due to hardware capabilities or due to resources like production budget, time, maybe a little bit of everything? Tiago?
Yeah, I was gonna say a little bit based on my own experience. I think how the panelists can add to this, but based on my own experience, is a little bit of everything. Most of the time, it's just a perceived idea that it's a silver bullet that you can do everything that you want, any change that you want. I guess that I don't know where this came from. The people got that this idea that has virtual production means in the day we can just change completely everything, and I think that's the expectation a lot of directors and people on set have, which is true to a certain extent, but not as true, at least at this point in time, as they would expect it to be. There's still some technical limitations involved in there. And every time I see someone facing some kind of frustration, it's because they thought they could do something that they left for the day of the shoot to think about that, to figure out that problem, and then they get in the day of the shoot, it's like, oh, it's not as free as or as dynamic as I thought it would be. And this is something that I see happening a lot to the point that that's also what is awesome about virtual production is that you can in the day of the shoot you have more leeway. Maybe you have a crazy idea and you go to your team and say, hey, this is doable, and they say, yeah, it's totally doable, as before I wouldn't be able to do in a traditional effects pipeline. So it's literally like a balance game and what can be done and what can not be done in the expectation game.
It's really expectations and understanding. Brian.
Well, I sat down and kind of like try to create a small list of factors that are really important to hit in order to, you know, pull this off and have a successful shoot. So one of them is the optimization of 3D content, that obviously has to take place in order to get the necessary performance you need. There's proper camera tracking technology, depending upon what level of tech you're using there will determine and limit you potentially. There's equipment and data synchronization, which is a big factor in getting everything synchronized and working together. There's color science. There's all the limitations and capabilities of the LED wall that we've been talking about now, and then lighting and cinematography. And I would say, of all of these, if one of them is limited or missing, or there's a weak point there, you're going to potentially experience some trauma.
Makes sense. Muja.
And I just wanted to mention about budget and cost that hasn't changed anywhere. So often in times we will try to accomplish a lot with very little. So we can see that because virtual production is pretty fast turnaround and people expect real time. So more and more we're getting less and less time to produce these environments sometimes. And the fidelity and the quality needs to be higher, while the time we actually get is decreasing because they're like, oh, you guys turned it around so quick. Let's do it even faster next time. And then for like a creative standpoint for the production designer, he still wants to build his fantastical environments that may or may not be so easy, because as long as it's customized, you still have to create those unique sets. And then sometimes we have to wait for the practicals to be built so that we can scan it. Other times we were lucky actually to work with people like Doug and Jonathan Lee, Paul Kirby, just to name a few production designers that would actually come to us, and sometimes we would develop things faster. So they look at it and say, oh, these digital versions actually look great. Could you send it to us? So we will provide those examples and they would actually match the practical to our virtual assets. So at least we have the collaborative approach that helps things to go faster and easier, but the cost is always an issue. And we are trying to see, oh, maybe we needed 3 lighting scenarios. How can we get away with just 1 bake and using CCRs and using adjustments to try and mimic different looks? Sometimes we could do like even a day for night kind of filter as well, just to save on costs, because each time there's a new bake, there's a new lighting scenario, it's additional cost. So yeah, it's that same issue of budget that's always around.
Right. And that's just like every production.
That is exactly.
I want to move on to transitioning roles, because we have a few questions in the Q&A, and this is definitely something we wanted to cover here. We were talking about the virtual art department. If you're an artist working, let's say, VFX or animation today, or even games, what should you be learning to get a good start? What's a good path into virtual art department? I'll start with Tiago.
I'm gonna geek out about this one. So the cool thing I think for everyone that is starting, and I'm not just saying this because I work at Epic, is that you can learn a software which is Unreal Engine. If you're coming for games, you probably already have some knowledge of it. And if you're coming from some offline rendering pipeline, you might be using it already, right? And it's one skill set in different areas of the software that you can use for different industries, right? And virtual production is no different from that if you're using Unreal for that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into Unreal that you might think, oh, because I work with games, this is not useful, but it's going to be mad useful. Like we have a lot of people that works in games before that they came to work virtual production because they know so much about optimizing scenes and stuff like that, right? We have people that are level designers and they really fell in love with world building, which is, by the way, to answer your question, the area that I think most people should focus on to work in a VAD department. So they just fell in love with creating those worlds that they would do before, maybe for a VR game or for a traditional game, for the character to navigate. But now we're essentially just positioning cameras in that world. So there is a lot of cross-pollination between the industries if you're coming from that perspective. And if you come from an industry that didn't use Unreal, maybe use Maya, it's easily transition. It's not as complicated as some people might think. I think if you really wanted to start your trajectory in virtual production, the best place to start is trying to focus in world building, because this is mainly the bulk of the tasks they're going to be doing. Besides like lagging and optimizing, like most of the time spent is really building those worlds. As a matter of fact, we're going to be probably building those worlds very unperformant, right? Until the point that we're going to have a green light. This is good. Now make this run into the LED wall, something like that, right? So yeah, virtual production would be sorry, world building would be where I would start my journey.
So my days of taking 4 days to render a frame are over, eh?
Not necessarily. Expectations.
Exactly. Fair enough. Jim.
Yeah, I would kind of lean into having traditional cinematography, photography, lighting background. If you're coming over from any DCC, Blender, Maya, Max, pick your flavor, pick your flavor of post renderer too. I think having a solid, background in art and in, cinematography and photography is going to help you immensely. I would say a lot of time what we're doing in optimization is cleaning up potentially sometimes junior artists throwing in too many rec lights into a scene and and looking at that. So I would agree with Tiago of like, Unreal is kind of a hub today of a lot of tools that people say, what do you look at? What tools should I learn? Should I pick up? I'm biased to say that, like Unreal, Blender, and Houdini are probably my top three right now. When people ask me what should I dive into, those are what I've spent the last bunch of years for myself looking into. But yeah, understand as an artist, no matter what position you may be sitting in today, if you want to get more into roles that fit into ICVFX, onset virtual production teams or VAD, is if you have a traditional comp background and you're a really amazing lighter, you're going to be like a key asset for those of us, either VAD or for an onset team. So a lot of that transition of skills from an art team with an understanding of a traditional DCC. If you come from a games background, as Tiago said, being world building and layout, that is hugely beneficial to VAD and to onset, and just a good understanding of kind of technology, because you can learn a package, but it's harder to understand some of the other intent, of like being, people skills. The soft skills are really important here of being able to communicate to people besides the technical thing. Is soft skills to meet with the technical are really important for any person in the side.
Yeah. Mujia.
Yeah, Jim said it so well. But indeed, actually, we are very much gravitating towards generalists these days. So the broader your skill sets and the more hats you can wear, we tend to find them to be more easy to get placed and staffed into projects than like people who are very niche, very specific into one thing. So we would highly encourage people to expand their skill sets a bit more and become generalists and world builders. And for like professionals, we find a lot of people that come to that because they want to do more than one thing. They are from traditional VFX background where they got to do one thing only every single day, and now they get to touch it from the beginning to the end, seeing it from concept all the way to actually getting shot on the volume for ICVFX. So they have this ownership towards that environment. And I think that's really rewarding for themselves as well. And I also wanted to highlight, if you want to find where to learn things, there are so much good materials out there. You have the VES handbook of virtual production, for example. We also have like a program called Virtual Production Academy that is in close partnership with Epic, between Pixel and Epic, and it's now offered through Seneca College for those of you that's in Toronto. So you can actually learn from a curriculum that's actually designed by industry professionals from Pixel and taught to those ones that would, we hope, become VAD artists to join us. So if you're interested in things like that, feel free to reach out to us as well. And I hear next year is going to be OSAP eligible to for the students, I think that's a great opportunity to learn from the professionals in the industry.
Nice. Ben.
Come at this from more of a technical standpoint. I would, when it comes to layout, when it comes to world building, when it comes to all these different things, the one thing that I think is the basic building block is understanding asset data. This goes into optimization, it goes into everything working. So if you can sculpt in any different package you want, but understanding the fundamental data that goes into an asset means that you have control over the assets that go into your world. And so that would be my number one recommendation is understanding what makes up an asset that goes into Unreal, no matter where it comes from, because that allows you as either a guide or an operator to troubleshoot, which is a lot of what we do.
Nice. Tiago.
Oh, it's actually Marianne go first.
Oh, Marianne, please go
Okay.
ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in responding to all the different tools and all the different resources that are out there, whether you're doing something online, you're taking classes in person or what have you, I would just recommend to make sure that as you learn these tools to kind of center it around projects. I like to avoid what I call tutorial hell, where you just kind of go down a certain path and you just kind of keep going further down the rabbit hole, on and on and on and on and on forever, but then don't wind up with something that you can then put on a portfolio. So that would just be like a big piece of advice. Like whatever you do, whether it's a short tutorial or a long tutorial, or a full class or a degree program, make sure you're building out that portfolio.
Makes sense. No, Tiago.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add to that, I think when I talk to my students, I always use the same analogy. Now it makes even more sense because Lego is partners with Epic. But you should watch this moment in time when you have so many resources available for free. It's kind of like a sea. It's like you have all these Lego sets and you open all of them, throw all of them on the floor, and now you're trying to walk on, and you're stepping on everything and hurting yourself, and you're just trying to figure out where exactly should I be focusing on. That's why I say world building is such a good thing to start your investment in time, because you're dealing with lighting, you're dealing with composition, you're dealing with everything, and at the end of it, you're gonna have to be dealing with optimizing the environment too. So just to double down on that suggestion, if you really want to work in virtual production, I think world building as a whole is a good place to start. And then you're going to be touching so many different aspects of it that by the end of it, you're somewhat of a journalist. So I just really want people to know that. And if you're like seeking like, oh, I want to learn it, but where can I go? I don't have the money to invest right now, but I would love to see if there's any available resources for me. If you go to the dev.epicgames.com/community. There's a lot of tutorials for free there. There's whole learning paths with like 20 hours of training for free that you guys can seek it. ArtStation has also a bunch of good trainings for world building too. You don't specifically need to search for world building for virtual production because that's something you can specialize after, but the core skill set's kind of the same. So I would really recommend people to try to follow those breadcrumbs online.
Makes sense. Brian.
Yeah, I would say that, if you're coming from the artist perspective, everything that has been mentioned here hits home for sure. But for those technical nerds who are out there, and I know you are, you might want to start thinking, what kind of things would I need to be learning or exposed to that would help out on a virtual production stage, especially if you're going to be a stage operator or something like that. I would say, look into broadcast level engineering if you really want to dig in deep and understand all of the different levels of how this equipment works together, how you get it to synchronize with one another, and then of course, diving even further into color science and color theory about, the LEDs in the actual wall itself and how you can match that to actual lighting in the real world or what's being shot more traditionally. Those types of things are going to be super critical. So color science and color theory, massively important. Study Perforce and networking technology and source control management. That's a big thing. That's going to hang up everything if you don't have that right on set. And you know, learning, of course, how to really have a solid understanding in Unreal on end display and multi-display configurations is huge.
And that's actually a really good segue. I did want to dig into the various roles, including the technical and engineering side. Now, you covered a lot of that critical basis, but I'm curious from an opportunity perspective. Is everybody here is struggling to find those technical people for their LED stage? I'm seeing
Yes.
a lot of nodding heads, Jim.
Yes, I would say there are gaps in either transitional roles and knowledge. Either as Muja pointed out before, you find generalists, somebody that may be really good at knowing the engine, but may not have a ton of on-set experience time, or vice versa. You might have a lot of people that may have a ton of production experience, but they're newer to engines and media servers. But I would say that with generalists, you know, if you take a good broadcast tech, you can get them up to speed pretty well into, you know, if they have a sysadmin and an IT background, teaching them things like Perforce and learning some of the other hardware tech in there, it's usually an easier transition from them into like a on-set virtual production team. With more of the roles on set that are heavy interacting with the art teams and the other creatives, it definitely comes down to like the understanding of, you know, what it is that the engine's doing and what a traditional art team would look for, you know, from the virtual production team. You know, if you're talking about, you know, how Brian was mentioning a lot of the skill set too, it's like, you know, color theory and looking at lighting is really important because we have to blend foreground assets that are practical to virtual background assets. So there's a lot of this time that we spend in prep blending physical production to the virtual production. So there's a lot of this skill set that can kind of hand off between each other.
Makes sense, Tiago.
Yeah, it's hard to find people with experience in it. I'll just tell us a quick story. When I got hired at Pixelmon, when I was starting in virtual production, like I think 4 years or 5 years ago, we were talking about the environment we were working on, and then the meeting was concluded, and I just looked to the team and was like, well, what about sound? And everyone just looked at me like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because in my mind, it was like, oh, world building for games, you do have local sound because this is the forest, so maybe there's a sound that you walk by. And this is something that had nothing to do with virtual production. It was just me being ignorant about what exactly we were trying to achieve. And throughout the process, I kind of learned what exactly virtual production is. And I was very grateful to learn through in the company. But I think that's really the problem right now because there is a disconnect between the artists that get hired and the people that are on set working on those projects. And how exactly do you teach people what the on-set experience is if they cannot be on set, right? So that's a challenge for the leads and the supervisors. How are we gonna educate people exactly the experience is? And I found that the best way to really understand that is just documenting everything. Just like sharing a video, what's not only the final picture of what's being shot in that day, but also the almost like a making of what's being done. And just do daily reports. Say, this is what we did today. We had to do this because this didn't work. So it's really the way to, if you can't have an entire team on set, which is usually the case, to get everyone on the same page. And eventually you see magically people just start understanding, oh, we can't do this in Unreal because this is going to cause this problem eventually. So it's really just going to the threshold of knowledge. It's suddenly just like something just clicks as it did for me when it was starting. And it's like, oh yeah, we don't need to care about sound because it's not a game engine. Sorry, it's not a game. It's inside a game engine, but it's not a game. So that difference of different objectives from different people coming from VFX and game and how that all culminates in a project in virtual production, I think it's the biggest challenge in my opinion, especially as an educator too.
That makes sense. So curiosity, collaboration, critical. Now, I want to address, there's been a couple of questions in the QA I think are relative to this, especially the idea of breaking into this industry. If you're new to this and you don't have a lot of resources, Is there a way you can try this out, practice it? Is there something simple you can do that's accessible? Maybe I'll start with Jim.
I was going to say one, I was actually going to point this to Brian because Brian did a talk on this exact topic, and a bunch of us chimed in with Brian as he was going to be presenting this. But yes, you can start off, with a laptop with a web camera and a real-time engine. Being Unreal Engine is probably the easiest of the choices out there, and jump into this while you're experimenting and gaining more skills of doing this. But it's like the first thing I always say is jump into the engine, place a camera, place a light, look at building out an environment, following any of the epic led classes or stuff you can find online. But Brian has I think a really good example of starting off this way.
Brian, did you want to extend that?
Well, yeah, a lot of it is just dependent upon if you're completely new, total novice, newbie, and you only have your garage and a couple spare bucks to go around, yes, you can get yourself a green screen, you can get yourself a laptop and fire up Unreal and ta-da, I've got a green screen behind me now. And I guess that could qualify as a very low-end virtual production set. But you can move up and incrementally step up depending upon which technologies you're going to add. So you throw in something like a Vive tracker or a Vive Mars Pro solution, and the next thing you know, you're tracking a camera in 3D space. You can still use your green screen, to remove the background. You're still not using an in-camera visual effect, but you are essentially doing virtual production with just a $5,000 camera tracking solution. I know that still sounds a lot for the newbie, but that and a camera and a green screen and a laptop with Unreal, you're in business. And you can continue to step up further and further, depending upon, you could start doing short throw projectors if you want to have something using projection technology. It won't be quite as bright as an LED wall, but it certainly can work. And then, of course, moving on up, all the way up to having some sort of LED wall. There's even people that use large screen TVs, to do this type of work, which is totally fine. So it's dependent upon the shot, as we've mentioned before. It's dependent upon the budget and your ability to be comfortable with this kind of tech. So
Indeed. I think I've even seen like computer monitor, close-up camera, Vive tracker, and you got something. So it sounds like it just takes a little ingenuity. Ben.
I was just going to add on to that. Like, I think back in the day, I used my iPhone and a computer monitor to really guerrilla style this back before it was really taking hold, and using an app Epic had released to link your phone in. So, like, you can go really low tech, have one computer and the camera, and just like Brian was saying, you can probably get there, but it's the quality that you should expect the quality you're going to get.
Nice. And Tiago, to finish this off before we move on.
Quick point. We're talking about in-camera visual effects and LED panels, but like Brian said in the beginning, virtual production is an umbrella term, and I think people should not sleep on green screen. I work at Graphic. We're the leading company in broadcasting, real-time graphics for broadcasting, and we do a lot of virtual production with green screen. And I would just ask you guys to watch any sports, any live broadcast, any virtual studio that you might imagine. That's a whole industry dealing with virtual production that do not use LED panels, but they do crazy stuff with camera tracking and green screen replacement. Essentially, you have a talent in the green screen space or room, and you just put that person in a completely different world, right? How do you deal with the shadows of the person in the digital world? So there's a lot of cool stuff that goes into it. So it's if you think, yeah, I don't know what to do at home, I just want to start small, just buy a green screen tarp and just put behind you and try to put you in the digital world. That's already virtual production. It might not be like Brian said, in camera virtual production that you can see the background with the LEDs, but it's virtual production, and it's a cool skill set to have. It's a good starting point too. It's very cheap to get a green screen panel, so don't sleep on it.
And I'm curious from the people who hire here, these kind of like homebrew solutions, are those attractive things that you would love to see on people applying for these jobs?
1000%.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, and somebody did ask that in the questions I saw just perusing over it. It was like a lot of questions of like breaking in and what do those of us that are hiring for these teams and for studios look for? Sometimes it's harder to say, but yeah, if you have some of that, because this is a little bit different from your traditional, lighting TD reel or comp TD reel that you would get as a supervisor. So if you have some of those skills where you've set something like this up and you have your own VCam solution with like a Vive tracker that Brian talked about, and you've set up that you know how to run take recorder to a VCam either from your iPhone or an iPad, and you bought this little, setup from Amazon, like those are helpful for those of us to understand where your skill set leads out to besides just a software package. So I think for me, I want to see the experimentation happening coming from a reel. So if you have a shot that you did in Unreal and you recorded it in Take Recorder, you got the data in from like markerless mocap or Rococo setup or whatever you have access to, you rendered the shot out through, MRQ and sequencer. And then you show the behind the scenes, even shot on an iPhone of you just messing around with the VCam, like that's helpful for supervisors and VAD supervisors and other department heads to go, oh, okay, this person took the initiative to experiment. There are other skills that we can teach you once you come on board to the team or to the department. But as long as you have that kind of gusto or that initiative to experiment, that's a part that'll get your foot in the door.
I like it. Muja.
And this, what Jim is talking about, I totally agree with. And also it highlights the fact that we want to see personal projects. I think above all else, that if you took the time and effort to actually complete something by yourself, that goes a long way because it takes so much more efforts and discipline to like see it through, being accountable to yourself, as opposed to like a traditional reel from VFX with like projects that a lot of people were involved in. So it's difficult for HODs like myself to know what is your actual involvement and contribution. But personal projects we love because that really shows you went out all your way to like learn how to do it and actually showing like the product that's all from you. I think that's huge and important. And we prefer to see those if you want to get your foot in the door, do personal projects.
Nice. And I'd love to dig into the hiring, like getting hired onto virtual practice. We definitely got a lot of questions in the Q&A. Starting with Mujia, do you hire recent graduates, juniors, and people who aren't seniors in the industry?
Oh yeah, definitely. We actually, this is a great story because one of my very first hires in the virtual art department was a recent grad, local from Oakville, and he was a very shy individual. I remember on the call for his interview, he wore a suit, shaking like a leaf, very excited but also scared. It was over Zoom, and I could see how nervous he was, and he had audio problem. So I was like, "Don't worry, you're okay, you're okay." And I guess he was nervous because he's just out of school, didn't know what to expect, and we saw his portfolio, and it wasn't even that much of work. It had a beautifully done environment that he actually put a lot of details into, like what's actually on the table. Every little element, you can tell he had put thought into it. And then another piece he had was this asset. It was just a prop that, or an item that he found in his room, that he decided to do a replica of it. And I saw that he paid attention to like the finger smudging, like the oil stains on the surface, and the ever so subtle like sticker rolling with appealing edges and things like that, which made me go like, okay, well, this guy's got a great eye, student or not, recent grad or not. This is a person that would actually be able to channel that good eye into production. So we brought him in, and he learned really quick. He took notes and just absorbed like a sponge. And we didn't really have to explain the same things twice. So very quickly he advanced, and now like in our recent projects, he's one of our strongest artists in the team, rivaling like the products from seniors. So I think students can completely succeed in this field as long as you have a good eye and you pay attention to details. It's going to get you very, very far.
Nice. Tiago.
Just to add to that point, I think, especially as an instructor, I think a lot of the companies, when they looking to hire juniors, they're not really looking for the portfolio as it is right now. They're hiring potential. They're trying to see something in the person that they either see that they can be a culture that can be guided inside the company and say, hey, this is something that will be interesting. You're interested in learning this. This is something that you'll be happy to be involved. And you're also looking for someone that is nice to work with, right? That's another thing. Like we talked a little bit in the beginning about soft skills, but that's especially in virtual production, that's crazy, crazy necessary, right? Like usually, like straight up, like days that you need to be on set, they're very long days. So you want to be working with people that is going to be an enjoyable experience. You don't want to be working with someone who's going to be stressing you out. So that's probably one of the things too that people should really focus on. How can you be social? How can you culture? So sorry, how can you like nurture a culture in the company that makes people to be like happy around you? You know, you need to be an asset to the team. You need to be someone that's adding to the pool of goodwill, not someone that's kind of draining it, right? So I think people really apply, especially my students when they graduate, they're just like terrified. Oh, this portfolio is not up to the standards of the industry. And I always tell them that no one's gonna hire you with a Mandalorian portfolio. If you come to the school and you're graduating with that portfolio, I don't know what the fuck you're doing here. People are gonna hire based on your potential. They're gonna see something here that you're passionate about, that they say, hey, this aligns with the objectives of the company, this aligns with the projects that we have. If you really like to work in sci-fi, maybe pick someone that has a project for you. If you really like to go for broadcasting, maybe graphic as a project to you, right? So that's kind of the stuff that I think usually juniors get on their heads and like, oh my God, I need to have the best portfolio ever. I need to know all these tools. And it's not really the point when you're getting your break into the industry, to be honest.
Makes sense. Jim.
I would just say on that, and I know there's probably a fact for everybody on this panel, that none of us here know everything. So setting expectations on yourself as a new graduate or someone coming that didn't come from traditional education into this world. And there's a lot of people that I think had commented, hey, what do I do if I was an editor or colorist, or I'm coming from a different realm and I don't know 3D, but I know these skills, one thing that I definitely look at, as Tiago was mentioning and others, is like, like kind of what is the package deal with that person? Not only do you look for potential, you look at like, how is that person going to work on a team? Are they more of an artist or a person that's going to sit on a team that might not be the person that interacts with the client day to day? So you look at those soft skills that we brought up earlier, and you try to look at, how can I help mold this person to what I need or what we need at the studio? And then also, how does that person gel within a team? Because that is all what this is made up of. Like, filmmaking as a whole is a collaborative, endeavor. So if your goal is to be an individual artist, like maybe making your own films at first is probably the route for you. But know that when you're in a virtual production team, an on-set virtual production team, a VAD team, any of that, or you're at a studio level, like, you're a part of one big cohesive team. And me as a supervisor, I'm only as good as the team helping me, because it's not that like when I build teams, I'm above my team. I want to be like horizontal with my team so that, I can lean on them, they can lean on me. They're going to have different skills than I have, and we all have to kind of help each other out there. So that's one thing that I think people newer to this industry get caught up as like, oh, I've got to know everything about Unreal. No one here knows everything about Unreal. And a lot of us have been using it for a long time. So, don't get caught up in too much of the minutia of having all the tech in your portfolio and repertoire. Just make sure that your people skills are good. You'll be able to be, taught or learn, any of the stuff that you're not as familiar with yet. And whether you come from being educated on a traditional background or you come, from like street knowledge, like I did, there's a path for you of whichever way that you're coming from.
Nice. Yeah, and I think, it's a challenge because soft skills are harder to teach. And the industries have kind of focused on, focus, specialize. So it makes me really happy to hear the more opportunity for generalism and developing soft skills, because I think those play in any industry. Marianne, what do you think?
Yeah, I was just jumping off of what Jim and Jago were saying. Um, Another thing, in addition, another soft skill I would say is learning how to problem solve. And again, uh, the portfolio is important. The end product is important, but also the process. I think, especially for students, we drive home the idea of documentation and documenting your process, because that's going to show an employer, okay, they had this problem. How did they go about figuring it out? Um, and also, for students, especially, I think one of the key skills, and I think it's part of the Tisch School of the Arts bread and butter, is storytelling. Um, you know, not only knowing how to tell the story that you want to produce, but being able to talk about that story, being able to present it, being able to pitch it, is going to be a key skill as a working artist.
Definitely. And I love that, you know, storytelling, that's what we do, right? Ultimately, we're all just telling stories. So I love that focus. And I also love that you mentioned documentation. As an employer, I found the artists who come to me and apply for a job with a blog or something like that that goes through the process they went through so I can see what they did. It's like, okay, I understand you, I know what you went through. We can work together. Tiago.
Yeah, I was gonna make a point, but then you guys spoke about documentation. That's a better point. I think Marianne shared the biggest advice here in this call, that for our employer, if you know how to document the process that you're going through, like they hire someone, they have the skill set, and there are two people. One that is documented the whole thing, and there's one that just have the skill set. The employer will prefer the one that's documenting, because for the employer, that person now is a point in the company for anyone that wants to learn the skill set to go to. And that's, I'll tell you about my own experience. Learning how to document stuff and learning how to teach stuff and sharing knowledge is the most rewarding, fucking awesome experience there is. I learned so much more because I teach than I did before. It's very, very hard to learn how to teach and to learn how to convey information in a way that people can learn. It's a skill that you master. It's like going to the gym, getting buff. And eventually just like, oh my God, I can teach anything. And guess what? When you can teach a lot of stuff, you can also learn so much easier. So for you, it's like you're a killing machine. You're helping people improve their skill sets. And when you want to learn something that's harder, the threshold to learn that stuff gets easier, right? So I really think Marianne kill with this advice. For everyone here that wants to really have a killer portfolio, all of you know already what everyone's looking for, right? World building, lighting, that kind of stuff. You want to go for the extra mile. It's just showing that you're able to share knowledge and document your process. That really is what sets you apart, to be quite honest.
Love it. Mujia.
Yeah, and the final thought on that whole documentation part is that it also shows initiative. And when we are looking for candidates that would elevate to actually leadership positions, these are usually the folks that we look for, because they took the time, they are actually sharing their knowledge with the rest of the team. So if we want people to take care of and start doing that and looking after teams, those are the folks that we look for. So yeah, initiative and documentation and sharing.
Nice. Jim.
Yeah, and just to add on that, the documentation side and um, not to go into the tech side of it too, but a lot of us at studios and per project, require that, if you're new or working within that documentation is a really big process of that, and whatever internal tools or tools you may be using. Some people use everything from Slide to Slack to internal applications, but it's a part of the education too, is that like if you go up in the ranks, from being layout, you work your way up to VAD, potentially get to a position like Muja where she's a VAD supervisor, CG soup, VP soup, things like that. Is these are all transferable skills, and documenting how you did this one thing that like saved the day is really important for you as you grow in your role, within, especially within virtual production. Is just get used to sharing knowledge. Like this whole thing of like trying to covet the secrets. It's like, yes, I get it. It's a business case, for somebody to say they have, these skills or these offerings, as services. But when you're part of a team, that's really it. Like it does better for the team to share the knowledge than for one person to keep it in.
I love that. And I'm curious, Jim, like I kind of came into this expecting to be a lot of tech. Oh, you need to know this, you need to know this. But really, this conversation is focused on soft skills, people skills, um, all this technical stuff. Is it something you can learn when you get to the stage, when you get employed, if you bring the right skills to the table?
You 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 definitely need to have an understanding of the technology. It is that part, and I see a lot of people on this question and the question and answers here too, of just like, well, what do I need to learn to come to this? And it's just like, yes, this is very technical at times, but there are different roles in this that apply the technologies in different ways. Like VAD is going to use technology a different way than an LED technician would, versus some of the other roles that are there, and they're all supporting each other. As your LED engineering team is supporting what your stage operators are doing and what the VAD is doing. So it's like, that's why we keep talking about these soft skills, and we talk about this team collaboration that happens here, is because it does take different understandings. Is like, you may have an LED tech that doesn't know Unreal as well as your stage operators or your VAD team, and that's okay. But that person on the VAD team can show the LED tech a little bit more of that. So if we're talking about timecode tick, and the LED tech is explaining to the Unreal Engine operator, what timecode and genlock is, and why it's so important, and why they're checking this checkbox on and off in Unreal. It's these transferable things that happen there. But yes, technical skills coming into this, it's hard. I will not sugarcoat it, that yes, there are some things that unless you get hands-on with this technology, is it exactly easy to learn. But if you pick up the basis of it, if you understand genlock and timecode, if you know a little bit about cameras, if you know a little bit about color and post and VFX and a flavor of a DCC, it's going to help you to that. We understand, or I understand, and I'm sure everybody else here, that not everybody's going to know everything coming into a team. Even if you're a traditional seasoned VP soup, like if I go to another stage, if I go to Pixo's stage, I've got to integrate with Josh and Muja and the team over there to understand how their pipeline works.
Nice. Muja.
I swear I'll get off the topic on documentation, but it is so important. And I just want to highlight the fact that VAD works so closely with the stage team. So documentation for handing off the environment, so the operators actually understands what to look for, where are all the controls that we've set up so that they can actually maneuver and use on the day of shoot. Super important. And for the people that's actually on set, all the issues that encounter during the shoot, during the blend, often will get a report, a stage report of like how everything went, so that this can be shared as like a gold of a resource to everybody else in the department to learn from. Okay, this was the issue they encountered on these environments. Next time, we're going to be careful. So we are making this vast list of knowledge of like pitfalls to avoid, things to do, things that works really well. So it's all about sharing that knowledge, and we cannot be at all the productions all the time. You know, we are having shoots that's happening in different locations in the world. So we rely on everyone to actually share that knowledge more than ever before. And I can't stress it enough how important this is. So yeah, I'm going to stop now.
Thank you. No, it's a great point. And like, I think, you know, we'll, at the end of this, we'll talk about this, but I was really happy to have this, this book, because it's kind of a tome of that knowledge and best practice that's developed. Closing this topic out, Ben, what do you think?
I was going to say, like, we've gotten some of our best folks, not from VFX, but from events, from music. And that's because, like Jim said, they have the understanding of how to engage and collaborate with the team, but they also have grace under pressure. And so to find your skill is part of it. You will find that as you go, but it's also, I think the thing is, it's about being able to work in concert with others when really, really high stakes are involved and not freak out. And so that is, I think, a critical skill.
That's a really interesting point that I didn't think about before. It's really cool. It's, you know, we're not used to being live in a sense. So I want to pivot a bit. We talked about roles for, you know, filmmakers and technical people and artists. What about the other roles that are happen in traditional filmmaking, like on-set camera crew, producers, editors? Is there a place on the virtual production in-camera VFX LED volume for those roles, and is there a good transition path for those people? Jim?
Oh, yes. I would say having a very good producer working with you can save your bacon more ways than not, or tofu if you're you know, vegan or vegetarian. But yes, having other support roles like, you know, producers, production managers, you know, other traditional roles come into virtual production. If you have a seasoned producer, you know, they can talk with your VP soups, your VAD soups, all that. You can talk about budgeting, you can talk about scheduling, you can talk about just how you're going to build up the team. So you might have to augment the team that you have in-house with a bunch of freelancers. Like, producers and production managers are going to help you, you know, with a lot of those resources. They also can be a buffer for you when you need them between the client. You know, it's like you can have your producer, you know, go step out there for you while you know, everybody else is trying to figure out, you know, some of the other hurdles that are happening, you know, from from the VAD side of things, or just interacting day to day with the other clients too, because usually producers, they go right for each other. So traditional production production team producer is going to seek out the virtual production team's producer so they can get on the same wavelength. So yeah, these roles that are looking to transition, if you have those skills, you know, from camera, from producing, from production management, they're all transferable into ICVFX teams.
Marianne?
And yeah, just echoing that producers can save your butt, and those are vital roles. And also a producer working with clients, working with the director, they're also going to be able to determine what needs to be in virtual production. Not everything of your project or piece needs to be done with virtual production. What makes more sense to be practical, thinking about budgeting and scheduling and all those things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious, you know, if you're coming from a traditional film set, what is the most important piece of advice you would give someone who is trying to transition into a virtual production set, or just got a job and it's their first day on a virtual production set? What do they need to know? I'll throw that out to anybody here.
Seek out the VP soup. Make friends with any of the HODs on the virtual production team, because it's going to be that choreography that we've all been talking about. Is, you know, if if you're coming from the traditional side and working with any of these new tools or anything, there's going to be an understanding between us on the ICVFX and on-set virtual production teams and VAD teams that have to interact with you and the traditional teams, because if an AD doesn't care what technology you're using, if you're going to slow up the times, he or she doesn't care if your virtual production VFX, whatever it is, your 2 minutes is your 2 minutes, so time is money. So for me, going and seeking out, the DP, the production designer, the art director, and the ADs, and making very nice with them to understand, like, hey, on the day, like, I'm going to be having our teams put, these camera tracking markers all over this place if we're using a certain type. Hey, we have to go up and readjust optical, cameras, on the set of the LED volume. So, that whole kind of going back and forth of like, what do I need to tell the traditional team to give my team the best the best path of success, is going to be like seeing where they understand, like, do you know what we do as a virtual production team? Are you understanding of the time that we may need? Or so that's why having these discussions really early with the traditional roles, when you get on set, is really important.
Makes sense. Brian.
Yeah, I would look at it from the point of view of the cinematographer, in the sense of your knowledge of camera, your knowledge of understanding what makes a good shot, what's good for lighting. All of these things are going to translate really well onto the stage, in the sense of that there's, how should I put this? CG people understand CG, camera people and film people and traditional production people understand, film and production. And, in the past, never the two shall meet. And now in virtual production, it's these people that are showing an interest on one side of the fence in the disciplines of the other. So like previs artists, they are traditionally very skilled in camera and layout and shot composition. And so they would start learning about those techniques in order to communicate better with cinematographers. What we're seeing in virtual production is different, because now the blending is occurring so well between these different disciplines that cinematographers who are traditionally behind the camera all the time are now actually getting into CG, which is nice to see. Whereas before, in the past, you would never see that. They would give you their knowledge, but they would never really actually touch a computer. Some would, not all. And likewise, people in CG are now starting to step out and actually put their hands on a camera and actually figure out how a camera actually operates. And so it's this ability to take a small risk in an area of interest that may not be your primary discipline, but something that you want to learn about, that you have knowledge that you can share. In a virtual production setting, it's much more likely that that transfer of knowledge is going to happen.
Nice. It really feels like most of the roles that exist in a film production are quite transferable in this space. It's filmmaking. It's just a different way of doing it. Mujit.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that usually on a virtual production project, if we as VAD have done our job right, the traditional filmmakers would not be confused when they are actually at the volume. We would have already communicated and talked through all the issues ahead of time. So for them, I guess the first thing is just know who your points of contacts are, like your VP, soup, your producers, and through all the preparation that we would have done, that would have helped you to figure out all these things. So when you actually get to set or get to the volume, it's not going to be the first time you would feel like you already know this space because we've planned everything out with you. I think that's where we come in as like a department that actually has all the answers to your creative issues and help you plan everything.
Nice. Yeah, I love that this is kind of an industry that, being somewhat new, has kind of built up that collaboration as a best practice. And I think that's phenomenal. And we're getting closer to the end of this session, so I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the fact that this is a new field in a sense. Virtual production has been around for a long time, but in camera VFX, a lot of people are coming onto these sets new. It isn't the same teams that have been working for 20 years together and are pretty locked down. So given that it's potentially a level playing field, I'm thinking about people who maybe are from groups that are traditionally underrepresented in filmmaking. I'm curious what we can do as educators and as an industry to increase opportunities for those groups in this newer technology. And I'd love to start with Shanaz.
Yep, got me. So as educators in industry, it starts out with giving an opportunity and removing those barriers to costs, in terms of, and also access via location. I can speak for myself because of the Epic Games fellowships with Brian Pohl. I'm here sitting with you today because I got access to that free education, and because they were, they happen out of LA, I'm in Toronto, I was able to access them because they were held virtually. And that's one example for myself. And it goes for everyone, not just for underrepresented groups, but access and cost. That's two huge factors, and they're generally the things that are barriers for underrepresented groups. With COVID, that allowed virtual training. That was amazing. And in the last few years, I've been part of 2 micro-credentials that were both free for underrepresented groups. And they were thousands of dollars in terms of a price tag, but because they were free, underrepresented groups were able to access them. And that was phenomenal. And that happened in the last 2 years or so. And they're still going on. And that's what educators can do. That's what industry can do. Equally important is building the confidence of individuals, underrepresented groups. Generally, they are afraid to step into these roles. They're intimidated by the technology and what the nature of the industry and the nature of who is in the industry. And they don't see themselves a lot of the times in those roles. So equally important is building the confidence of these individuals in the communities and encouraging them that they can have a place in this industry. They too can tell their stories. Jim mentioned this a lot. It comes back to soft skills. And I find that's something really, really key that has to be taught. Filmmaking is a collaborative medium, and being professional in this industry, and as I mentioned, the nature of it is not just technical skills, but soft skills, and that's missing. It all ties back to building that confidence, stepping out of your comfort zone, and saying you have that place. But the industry and educators, as you mentioned, but underrepresented groups who have had an opportunity to be in the industry, they themselves have to encourage other underrepresented groups. They have to advocate for other underrepresented groups and be inclusive themselves and share their knowledge themselves. Otherwise, they're not the right role models, and it becomes a vicious cycle that goes round and round where there's still that barrier to access. So there's multiple things that has to be in place to support underrepresented groups, and otherwise it will continue to be intimidated, and they would not have that opportunity.
Makes sense. Marianne.
Yeah, jumping off of what Shanaz said, for me, there's a couple of things. So one, in terms of content, in the classroom, for example, I think it's super important to make sure that you're showing projects from a variety of different folks so that your students are able to see themselves and then get the confidence to be able to tell their stories, especially in a highly technical field. And again, looking at, so there's content, there's also technology. There is implicit bias in technology. There, for my project, the Euresia project, I look at, for inspiration, to certain artists doing amazing things in the field, like Lajanae McMillan, who does the Black Movement Project, A.M. Dark, who created the open source Afro hair library after seeing that there are very few options for Afro hair textures for digital humans. You know, teaching students that their stories matters is important, but also teaching them to maybe have a critical eye when it comes to workflows and tech is super important. And then again, from education, deepening and continuing the relationships that we have, the industry, and getting people access so that they can work on a stage is important. Internships are great. Paid internships, even better, because unpaid internships, unfortunately, cut some people out from being able to even enter the field. So yeah, I think access for sure. Another person that I want to shout out, Quaina Friedman from Magic Box, has an apprenticeship that was approved by the Department of Labor. Again, getting people that onset access is just, yeah, I can't state it enough how important it is.
Awesome. Tiago.
Yeah, I just want to add to the point that both Marianne and Janaz did about the perspective that some groups have that are different from the industry. There is a like a culture that I will argue that is very stale right now. So people are looking for new voices and new perspectives to kind of add to that. So there's never a better moment than now to do yourself a favor to just express yourself and try to use this technology for perspective we don't even know exists yet because no one presented us with that, right? So I see a lot of people very like scared or just it's telling stories that are related to their culture, related to their identities. I don't think you should be scared. I think you actually have an amazing opportunity to be celebrated. And it double down on that. The culture right now, what we see is so much of the same. This is a kill, right? It's a kill shot. You do something different, you will be acknowledged, you will be respected, and that's what we're looking at. So I think it's don't be scared, just put yourself out there, to be honest.
Nice. Marianne.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up another opportunity. You know, Tish, we're gonna have this MPS and virtual production. It's 1 year, but you know, it'll be very intensive, but maybe that's not feasible for some folks. And trust me, things like scholarships are absolutely top of mind. But 2 weeks ago, we had a great meeting. I want to shout out Diana from Epic Games, who's in charge of like education. She put together a group of women in real time in New York. And from that, there were some presentations on things people are doing in terms of accessibility. But then there's this one organization, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, that's very local, and there are local organizations all throughout the country that is focused on media education for people who may not be able to afford a full-time degree or don't have a background in virtual visual effects or filmmaking. And so Tiffany Blount is working on virtual production education at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And I just wanted to shout that out and also thank Diana for that opportunity, because we can together think of ways to kind of lessen some of these gaps and get rid of some of these barriers.
Nice. I think, and it sounds like there may be similar opportunities or groups in other locales that people could seek out. Mujia, one last point before we come to our final question.
Yeah, I just wanted to also mention CEE Center for Young Black Professionals. They are a Toronto-based charity that's kind of dedicated to addressing the economic and social barriers that affect young Black youth. And I remember Spin VFX also had like a partnership program where they would actually bring these young Black professionals from the CE Center to actually have an opportunity to join and work with an internship to actually get access and a foot into the industry. So I wish there were more things like that that's around so that, you know, people can actually get their foot in. But at least we have Unreal, right? It's easier to create environments and tell stories easier than ever before. So you can actually do a lot of things by yourself, even at home.
That's it. If you have a computer, Unreal is free. You can jump into it.
Yeah.
Sometimes that getting that computer is even a challenge. Marianne.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, I think I think Ben and I mentioned this at the kind of the top, in terms of like underserved folks doing great work, like C. Craig's film, Fathead, that was completed, like Eric Weaver from the ETC was and on USC worked as a producer on that. And the fact that they were able to do that, you know, is partially because Amazon let them film on their stage. So, you know, education and industry really do have to work together, because look at these amazing stories that are able to come out of that.
And I think, and that is a perfect segue to my last question. I'm curious of other examples where when the industry invests in people who don't normally have access to those kinds of technologies or education, we see great things happening. And I think Shanaz, I'm curious if you have an example of a story of someone who was invested in and how it came out, and what challenges they faced, and what did that person bring to the table? What did the industry bring to the table to make that successful?
Yes, I have a great story actually out of Yellowknife. And this is a participant. It was for the very first Indigenous micro-credential that happened this summer in Vancouver. Part of it was virtual, and then there was an in-person component in Vancouver. All Indigenous participants from across Canada. And this story is from Carl Jr., and he's based in Yellowknife. And I want to read the blurb that he sent me, and I'm so proud, and I think it deserves a little bit of time for me to read. It's not very long. So here goes. He said, after gaining the skills from the IM4 virtual production storytelling micro-credential, I started my business, Shuta Productions, Inc., in mid-October here in Northwest Territories. The mission of Shuta is to center the stories, voices, and experiences of Arctic Indigenous peoples. Shortly after incorporating, my company was awarded a bid to run a national marketing campaign over the next 18 months. The campaign is geared towards Indigenous youth to educate them about sexual health, and is for a national NGO. In terms of services, I'm offering marketing, film production, and digital production, mainly focused on working with Northern communities. It was really a life-changing experience. The high caliber of instruction on Unreal Engine, the opportunities to show our work at VIF, as well as directing professional actors in the studio environment in Vancouver, gave me the confidence to really say, yes, I know how to do this. I have the tools I need to produce meaningful work and to bring creative ways of storytelling to Arctic Indigenous communities across the territories. I've been met with so much positivity since starting Shita, and I'm excited to see it continue to evolve. Thank you again for so much. Thank you again so much for the opportunity to be a part of this experience. Also, if there are any other opportunities to continue to grow with Time 4 or other digital film initiatives that you work with, please let me know. His barrier was cost and physical access. He's in Yellowknife, and all of that was removed. The barrier to technology was removed as well, because we had AWS giving them access with virtual machines. And now he has his own business that just started like a couple months ago. And he just finished this training this summer. So what an amazing story. And, you know, I'm so proud of him. And that was one of the goals of that training, not just to train him to get into the workforce, but to take it back to his community and build his community and the capacity. And, you know, that's the beauty of this in supporting underrepresented communities.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing. I think we are coming up on the 2 hours, and we've covered a ton of different areas. And first, I want to thank everybody here for your knowledge and experience. I think that was phenomenal, and hopefully it helps some people. I really think it will. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us. There's a ton of questions in the Q&A. And I think, you know, I don't think we're going to get to a lot of them, but I do want to highlight some resources that I think are going to help answer a lot of those questions. I'm just going to share my screen for a second here. And I think what we want to do here is follow up. So there's a couple things that are going to happen after this. My goal is to update our resources and make sure people understand the opportunities of virtual production, the stories, the school opportunities, the programs that you can apply to. But I want to show you this. So if we go to vesglobal.org, and you go to the resources item here, and you can go to a link here called Virtual Production Resources. You do not have to be a member to access this link. If we go here, this is kind of a live collected knowledge on the best practice of virtual production. So this is a really cool resource. It's always being updated. And I think a goal I'm taking away from this, given all the great questions, is I want to try and make sure we get these questions answered on this resource page so you can come to it and it stays there in the future. And we'll also be reaching out to all the schools and programs that are out there teaching this to try and make sure they're listed here, and we can share them with people. The other thing I want to call out, and we talked about it a few times, the VES is published through Routledge, the VS Handbook of Virtual Production. We will send out a link via email to the people who have registered to this talk on how to access this book. This is an absolute tome. It even includes 2 chapters from Brian Poole, some of which on education and other topics that are really excellent. So I think a lot of the kind of more detailed technical questions and specifics that came up in the Q&A, I think you will find an answer in this book. So highly encourage you to check this out. The other thing I definitely want to call out is VES is a volunteer organization, and we can't do this without our sponsors. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to our VES Toronto sponsors. We can't put on these events without them. So thanks to them. I'll stop sharing my screen here. And I think that's it. We hit 8:30. I think we covered a lot of great ground. Huge thank you again to everybody here. And you know, keep an eye out on the socials, because we'll be following up with more resources and information. And I thank everybody who attended today, asked questions, and watched this section. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.